What if I told you the person who broke you was actually the one who built you? Sounds insane, right? But here's the truth no one talks about. Some of the most powerful transformations don't begin with inspiration. They begin with insult, pain, pressure, power games. And in Rachel's case, it was a toxic boss. Rachel didn't just quit her job. She escaped a psychological war zone. One email, one manipulation, one sleepless night at a time. Her boss never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He just made her question her worth, until she nearly believed she had none. Sound familiar? We've all been there, or we're still there, carrying pain that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves a mark. But what if I told you that same toxic boss was the greatest gift she ever got? Most people think toxic bosses ruin lives, and it's true. 57% of employees don't quit jobs, they quit managers. We blame them for our burnout, breakdowns, and broken confidence. But in the next few minutes, you'll discover how some of the world's most successful people turn toxic leadership into fuel. By shifting just one thing, how they framed the pain. You'll learn how to decode your emotional reactions, not as flaws, but as feedback. How to stop being reactive and start being strategic, and why some of the most successful people now say the most unexpected thing: I owe my success to the person who made my life hell. Ready to turn your pain into power? Let's begin. You didn't burn out because of the job, you burned out because of them. The forced smiles, the 2 a.m. spirals, that hollow, sick feeling every Sunday night, all because of someone who seemed to take pride in making you feel small. Meet Rachel, 29, graphic designer, loved her work. Until her new manager walked in. Suddenly she was micromanaged down to the hour, blamed for things she never did, publicly shamed in meetings. The praise disappeared. Then the confidence, then the joy. One Friday, Rachel didn't just leave her job, she vanished. No goodbye, no closure, just silence. She thought walking out was the end. But what if it was actually the beginning? Here's what most people never realize. According to a 2022 Gallup report, 57% of employees say they've quit a job solely because of their manager. Not because of the company, not the workload. Just one person, one toxic influence, one voice in your head that keeps echoing long after they're gone. But here's the twist. What if that toxic boss, the one who drained you, was actually the person who would end up redirecting your entire life? What if the pain they caused had a purpose? Because maybe that chapter wasn't about breaking you. Maybe it was about waking you. You escaped the job. Now it's time to escape the mindset they left behind. And in the next few minutes, you'll discover why your worst boss might just be your greatest mirror, and how to turn their damage into your transformation. Here's the part no one tells you. Your emotions weren't caused by them. They were triggered by you. Sounds harsh, maybe, but it's also the most freeing truth you'll ever hear. Let's go back to Rachel. After quitting, she spent weeks obsessing over every conversation, every insult, every unfair email. But the more she replayed it, the more a strange pattern emerged. Her boss wasn't just attacking randomly. He always struck at specific places. Her need for approval, her fear of speaking up, her lack of boundaries. The insults weren't just painful, they were revealing. Psychologist Susan David calls this emotional agility. It means seeing emotions not as orders to obey, but as data to analyze. When someone humiliates you in front of the team and you feel rage, what is that emotion really pointing to? Maybe it's telling you, I've been silent too long. I need to value myself more. I want to be seen. You see, the manager wasn't the creator of Rachel's pain. He was just the mirror. And suddenly everything shifted. Because now, instead of blaming him, she could build herself. Your worst boss didn't just show you what you hate. They showed you what you need to heal. So the next time someone provokes you, don't just react. Ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? Because what you see as pressure might secretly be preparation. And in the next moment, we'll meet someone who lost everything in an instant, and somehow turned devastation into fuel. And speaking of pain, let's talk about someone who lost everything and still smiled. Because that's where the real fire starts. Now here's where it gets interesting. Imagine building your life's work over decades and watching it go up in flames in a single night. That's exactly what happened to Thomas Edison in December 1914. His entire research and development lab caught fire. Explosions, chemicals, total chaos. He stood there watching everything he had built burn. You'd expect devastation, despair, maybe even a breakdown. Instead, Edison turned to his son and said, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." The next morning, he calmly told reporters, "I'm not too old to make a fresh start." Then he got back to work. Why does this matter? Because most of us go through emotional fires at work, especially under a toxic boss. It may not be flames, but the burnout, the humiliation, the self-doubt, it feels just as real. But Edison shows us something powerful. Sometimes, fire doesn't just destroy, it clears the way. When your manager constantly micromanages you, when they make you doubt yourself, when they publicly shame you for speaking up, it might be the moment that forces you to sharpen your skills, to finally update your resume, to take that course you've been avoiding, to reach out to someone in your network. The fire hurts, but it also reveals what truly matters. And like Edison, you have a choice. Collapse with your ego, or build from the ashes. But here's the real twist. What if true strength isn't about rising from the fire, but learning how to walk through it, untouched? Because sometimes, the greatest power comes from not reacting at all. And that's exactly what the ancients mastered. Because that's where we go next. To the ancient secret that helped people survive emperors, war, and betrayal. So, what do you do when the pain feels personal? When every meeting feels like a minefield, and the weight of staying silent is heavier than speaking out? This is where most people either burn out or break through. The Stoics, ancient thinkers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, believed that pain by itself is neutral. It's our emotional reaction that turns discomfort into suffering. And that's where the power lies. Ryan Holiday calls this the hidden advantage of Stoicism. You don't fight emotionally, you move strategically. Picture this. While your toxic boss is throwing passive-aggressive remarks or sidelining you from important meetings, you don't respond with anger or tears. You respond like a glacier, steady above the surface, paddling hard beneath. You quietly start upgrading your skill set after work. You begin reconnecting with old mentors and building a quiet network. You track every accomplishment, every sabotage, every email, not to win a battle, but to win your exit plan. And maybe most importantly, you start seeing their behavior not as a reflection of your worth, but as a projection of their own limitations. This isn't suppression, it's strategy, emotional detachment, not to escape the situation, but to master it. That's why some people collapse under the pressure, while others, the ones who stay calm and calculate, end up stepping into roles 10 times bigger than where they started. The Stoics had a phrase for this mindset: the obstacle is the way. The very thing in your path becomes the path. So when you stop reacting and start moving silently, something unexpected happens. You become dangerous, not in anger, but in clarity. But if you're wondering whether all this quiet effort is even worth it, just wait till you hear what Viktor Frankl discovered in the darkest corners of human experience. There's a moment, after the anger, after the exhaustion, when a quiet question creeps in. Why did this happen to me? And more importantly, what was the point of all this? That's the question Viktor Frankl faced. Not in a boardroom, but inside a Nazi concentration camp. He lost everything: his family, his work, his freedom. But even there, in the darkest of places, he made a radical choice. He assigned meaning to his suffering. Frankl discovered something powerful, that pain without purpose destroys us. But pain with meaning, it transforms us. As he wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." Now, your toxic manager isn't a war criminal, but the lesson still holds. If you've ever been humiliated, micromanaged, or quietly erased at work, you know that quiet kind of pain, that kind of invisible violence. But instead of letting it define you, what if it could refine you? Maybe the suffering was a signal. Time to grow, time to leave, time to finally bet on yourself. Your manager didn't give you clarity on purpose. They gave it to you by accident, but it's still yours. And when you walk away, with a sharper skill set, a clearer mind, and a deeper sense of self, you don't walk away broken. You walk away built. Because in just a moment, you'll see how pain leads to something even more powerful, purpose that scales. What if the worst day of your career was the best thing that ever happened to you? Sounds impossible, until you hear this. In 1985, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. Yes, Apple. The company he co-founded in his parents' garage. Boardroom drama, power plays. A CEO he handpicked turned against him. At just 30, Jobs was ejected from the empire he built. Humiliated, gutted, and directionless. He called it a very public failure. But here's the flip, that failure was fuel. Jobs didn't fade, he rebuilt. He launched Next, the tech company that would later power future Apple systems. He bought a tiny animation studio and turned it into Pixar. By the time Apple begged him back, he wasn't just reinvented, he was a visionary with fire in his veins. That setback didn't end him, it forced him to evolve. Now ask yourself, maybe you weren't fired in a boardroom, maybe you were slowly suffocated, ghosted, gaslit, or ground down. But what if that pain wasn't an ending? What if it was the opening scene of your comeback? Because sometimes the push you hate becomes the pivot you needed. And yet, even when you've moved on, a better job, a stronger self, there's still one silent anchor dragging behind you. Let's talk about it. You left the job. But did the job ever leave you? You've moved on. New role, new team, new chapter. But quietly, behind the wins and the calm emails, something lingers. Resentment. You don't say it out loud, but the old tape still runs. They ruined my confidence. They wasted my years. They stole my peace. So let's ask the hard question. Are you still letting them live rent-free in your head? Here's the brutal truth. As long as you hold on to that resentment, they still have power. Not because they deserve it, but because you're still holding the story where they won. But here's the flip. Resentment doesn't protect you, it delays you. The shift comes when you realize everything you did to survive them was growth. That calm you learned during chaos, leadership. The skills you built to escape, assets. The gut instinct, the boundaries, the self-trust, emotional intelligence in action. They weren't just breaking you, they were unintentionally building the most resilient version of you. So don't replay what they took. Reclaim what you gained. You don't have to forgive them, but you do owe yourself your freedom, because when pain stops being your prison, it becomes your platform. And speaking of platforms, what if the very thing you went through is exactly what someone else needs to hear? Now here's where the story gets bigger than just you, because once you let go of resentment, you start to see a strange pattern. It's not just your story, it's the story of high performers across time. That unbearable moment, that toxic boss, that one job that almost broke you. It wasn't a detour, it was the inflection point. Take a step back and look at the ones we admire most. Steve Jobs was fired from the very company he built, humiliated in front of the world. Thomas Edison watched years of work burn to the ground and smiled through the ashes. Viktor Frankl endured unimaginable suffering and used it to pioneer an entire field of psychology. Even Ryan Holiday, the author who taught us to reframe obstacles, started his path after burning out under a toxic work environment. What do they all have in common? They didn't just endure pain, they converted it. What felt like betrayal in the moment turned out to be direction in disguise. That's the hidden pattern. The discomfort becomes a doorway. The dismissal becomes a beginning. The boss who tried to break you becomes the reason you built something unbreakable. And here's the quiet truth. Most high achievers didn't rise despite the pain. They rose because of it. Not because they liked it, not because they deserved it, but because when life cornered them, they stopped reacting and started building. And now, maybe it's your turn. So here's the real question. What if the most powerful thing you could say to your toxic manager is simply, thank you? Not because they were right, not because what they did was okay, but because without them, their pressure, their ego, their blind ambition, you might have stayed stuck. Comfortable, maybe. Safe, perhaps. But stagnant, small, settling. Instead, they forced a version of you to emerge. A version that could no longer ignore the discomfort. A version that started asking better questions. That began building exits. That said, I deserve better. Think about it. You didn't just leave a company. You didn't just escape a toxic environment. You walked away from an older version of yourself. The one that tolerated less than they were worth. The one who confused survival for growth. And that's the moment everything begins to shift. Saying thank you isn't about forgiving bad behavior. It's about reclaiming the narrative. Because when you say it with full awareness, with clarity, with distance, with growth, you turn the final page. You close the loop, not with bitterness, but with power. And here's what no one tells you. The moment you stop seeing them as the villain is the moment they lose all control over your story. You're free now, and what happens next, that's fully in your hands. Here's the truth no one likes to admit. They weren't your obstacle. They were your trigger, not a villain to defeat, but a mirror to outgrow. Not a punishment from life, but a necessary storm that forced your roots to go deeper. You didn't get stronger despite them. You got stronger because of them. Think back. Would you have upskilled that fast, networked that hard, planned that exit so clearly, if everything had been calm and easy? Unlikely, because ease rarely wakes us up. But discomfort? Discomfort demands growth, and that's the hidden pattern behind every reinvention story you've ever admired. Steve Jobs, Viktor Frankl, Thomas Edison. Even your own story, if you're honest, begins not with peace, but with pressure. So let's close the loop. That's why the highest performing people don't hold resentment. They hold gratitude, not because they're naive, not because they excuse poor behavior, but because they understand this. Success didn't come after the toxic boss, it came through them. Gratitude here isn't weakness, it's liberation. It's the final power move. You don't have to excuse what happened, you just have to own who you became because of it. Miss this realization, and you'll stay trapped in the loop of blame. But embrace it, and you unlock the exact transformation that every successful person quietly carries in their backstory. So if you're still angry, still replaying it all in your head, maybe it's time to pause, look back, and say the two most powerful words in your evolution: thank you. Remember Rachel? She didn't just walk away from a toxic manager. She walked away from a version of herself that had learned to stay small. Most of us don't leave jobs, we leave pain. But what if that pain wasn't just inflicted, but assigned? Your toxic boss wasn't the obstacle. They were the trigger, the storm that forced your roots to grow deeper. This isn't just psychology, it's emotional agility in action. As Viktor Frankl taught, suffering only becomes unbearable when it's meaningless. But if you assign meaning, if you say, thank you, you reclaim your power. Because the truth is, they didn't just break you, they built the person strong enough to leave. Was there ever a moment when someone's cruelty became your catalyst? If you feel moved, share your story below. Let's grow through pain together. At Metanoia, we're here to help you shift from knowing to becoming, to rewire your thinking, rise in life, work, relationships, and finances, and become who you were truly meant to be. If this video resonated, consider joining us on this journey. Thanks for watching.